The Three Martini Lunch is brought to you in part today by Fast Growing Trees, the biggest online nursery in the U.S. with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and more than 2 million happy customers. They have everything you could possibly want, like fruit trees, palm trees, evergreens, houseplants, and more. Fast Growing Trees also makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped directly to your door in just 1 to 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever. We love our big fig plant, our big monstera plant. They add so much vibrancy and ambiance to the room. And we love our new spice plants, the oregano and the basil, and the Alive and Thrive guarantee. Top notch. They will make everything right in the rare occurrence that something goes wrong. This spring, Fast Growing Trees has the best deals online, up to half off on select plants and other deals. And listeners to the Three Martini Lunch get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code Martini at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code Martini at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code Martini. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply.
Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, very glad to have you with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. As you know, Jim Garrity is off in Kansas City, and in his place today, we're very happy to have once again Scott Bertram, the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he also is a lecturer in journalism, directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, and in his spare time, he is also the co-host of the Political Beats podcast, and Wasn't That Special, 50 years of Saturday Night Live. So, Scott, busy guy, thank you for your time as always. And I know today being Earth Day, of course, you're even busier with all of your events of eco-friendliness, which I am sure is going to involve eating lots of meat and putting gas in your car.
You know, on this Earth Day, we're realizing that our recycling wasn't picked up on Friday because they've torn up our road terribly, and they're like, make sure your recycles are out by 4 a.m. That's when we're coming, so we don't mess with the construction crew. But they didn't come at all on Friday, and so now we have a full recycling bin, and we don't know what to do about it. So on Earth Day, some of that recycling might get shifted into the garbage can. I can't guarantee that won't happen today.
I was already skeptical of the whole recycling thing, and I became a full skeptic when the recycling truck picked up the trash and the trash picked up the recycling. So it all ends up at the same place.
Well, you know me. I'm a single issue voter on state issues in Michigan. I think we've talked about this, but we have this ridiculously stupid bottle deposit law in Michigan. And, to make a long story short, it's silly and it's dirty and you have to bring the bottles back. And people will push carts full of dirty, sticky, ridiculously full of germs bottles and cans through the produce section to get to the bottle recycling section of the store, because you've got to bring them back to the store. There's no independent place to bring it back. And it's just ridiculous. And so if someone vows to repeal the bottle deposit law in Michigan, you've got my vote.
Well, it's because it's 10 cents in Michigan. There's a famous Seinfeld episode that informed the whole country about that. But that's what, when I was growing up, that's if you wanted to do fundraisers, you'd go find pop cans. They're pop cans in Michigan, of course, and then get them back a dime at a time. Now, of course, you pay 10 cents more for everything up front. So you're not actually making anything other than maybe giving yourself a tetanus shot and some sort of disease from whatever can or bottle you pick up. So it's all the government's way of making you work for absolutely nothing. Anyway, that's all for free. That's not even one of the martinis today.
That's
but
right.
Let's talk about things even way worse than recycling, and that's rampant anti-Semitism on our college campuses. Columbia University in New York City is ground zero for this, but it is spreading to places like MIT and Yale, which actually finally did something about it this morning. This is all due to an organization called Students for Justice in Palestine. And in addition to what's happening at Columbia, which is basically the Occupy movement, if you remember Occupy Wall Street and the disgusting occupation of the square there in New York City, happened in Washington, D.C. and a couple places as well. And it just basically turned into chaos and, again, unsanitary conditions. The left is apparently very fond of those. They say that the official statement, universities have chosen profit and reputation over the lives of the people of Palestine and our will as students. The supposed power of our administrators is nothing compared to the strength of the United Student Staff and Faculty committed to realizing justice and upholding Palestinian liberation on campus. In the footsteps of our comrades, that gives it away, right? At Rutgers, New Brunswick, Tufts, and Columbia, we will seize our universities and force the administration to divest for the people of Gaza. Not to be outdone, over at MIT, this woman identifies herself as Hannah, and she's part of Scientists Against Genocide. And here's what she says.
We've shown our administrators the power that we hold, and we can't give it up. We are the ones who run this campus, who make the campus what it is. We hold the power, so we have to show them that we won't back down until they meet our demands.
Their demands are, divestment and ceasefire and no charges for students for breaking the law, of course. Over at Yale, this was the scene over the weekend.
Viva, viva Palestina!
And what are they going crazy about? The coming down of the American flag. This isn't even about anything in the Middle East. And so finally today, the campus police at Yale stepped up and told everybody they had to get out.
No one will stop you from leaving. If you do not leave, you will be arrested. We will give you time to leave. If you do not leave, you will be arrested.
And so at Columbia, it got so hostile that some Jewish students were actually going home. Their families were coming and picking them up. They simply didn't feel safe on campus. Obviously, a campaign of hate, intimidation. So, Scott, what do you make of, once again, the fact that these students are out of control, and in most cases, administrators are very slow and quiet to deal with it?
Yeah, if you're joining hands and preventing Jewish students from entering campus, you're the bad guys.
Yeah.
The first cut you played where the student says, "We are the ones who run the campus," a complete misunderstanding of the way that things operate, because all it would take is one expulsion and all of a sudden you don't run the campus anymore. You're a trespasser. You can be arrested. It's disgusting to see all this happening on Columbia's campus, MIT, Yale, Northwestern previously. All these places at which, the future leaders of the left are being inculcated with ideas. That's where we see these protests happening. And it simply wouldn't take much to stop them. Some of the pro-Palestine protesters are saying that the problem people are not students. They're from outside. Okay, well, that's why there's trespassing laws. So you can go through, kick out the people that shouldn't be there, arrest them if needed. If there are students who are responsible for some of this stuff, suspensions, expulsions will do the trick. And then once you're expelled, hey, you're trespassing too. It shouldn't take a lot to actually address this. Not to mention the fact that most of these colleges, if not all of them, are heavily reliant on federal funds to operate in many, many different ways. A threat from D.C. to withhold funding from universities who don't get this under control would have them acting very quickly, because money talks, and money is important. If D.C. threatened to take away that funding, to minimize that funding, something would happen. This also goes to show how disingenuous the whole the safe space movement was 3-4 years ago, when people really started talking about what was happening on campuses, maybe a few years before that. But the idea that administrators were concerned that words and phrases and Halloween costumes might be offensive to students, and they had to have some place to get away and control their thoughts and emotions. To look out and see what's happening on these campuses today and not do a single thing about it. The question is, why? It tells you who they're afraid of. They're not afraid of conservative voices. They're not afraid that conservative students won't come to campus. They're not coming already. What they are concerned about, who they are afraid of, are these voices on the left. They're afraid of actions they take to get control of their campuses, what consequences that might mean for the campus itself, whether it be rampant violence, whether it be protest and occupations like this, whether it be future students on the far left who decide, hey, maybe I won't go to Columbia. They're afraid of that more than they ever were afraid of backlash or consequences from actions concerning conservative speakers or anything like that.
Yes. And that's the problem when you make concessions, even if small, to stupid demands. They only want more demands. It's kind of like terrorists. You give in a little bit, they're just going to keep taking until they kind of do, in some ways, dictate what happens on campus. Yesterday, we got a pretty decent statement from the White House about how we respect free speech, but when it crosses this line, it's unacceptable and it needs to stop. They're not going to go any further than that. But was it signed by the president?
Nope.
No. Was it signed by the Secretary of Education? No. Was it even the starting press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre? No. It was the deputy press secretary. So clearly a huge priority over for the White House.
We've got to be clear about, too, is I don't think it was in the clips you played, but I've heard some from the weekend from Colombia and elsewhere. We are far past the line of pro-Palestine to pro-terrorists at this point. Yeah. The things that are being chanted, the things that are being said. And again, we are also far past the line of whatever they want to say, anti-Zion, whatever, to just full-out anti-Semitism. That line's been crossed long ago, and particularly this weekend at Columbia, where the chants are not pro-Palestinian, they're pro-Hamas. We support Hamas. I think there was one that Columbia was, kill another soldier. We support you, Hamas. These are pro-terrorism protests, pro-Hamas protests. They are not simply pro-Palestine. And that is a different shape of protest than what we've been dealing with recently, too.
No, that's exactly right. And Scott, I assume you're all for giving these people student loans for going to these high-priced universities and hating America and Jews.
Well, if they're not attending classes and are busy occupying, I guess maybe it should be waived. Right?
I saw some people suggest that if you're in the country on a student visa and engaging in behavior like this, maybe it's time to revoke those visas and send you packing. Okay, here's a respite from the bad and crazy news. 4Patriots. That's great news. 4patriots.com/martini is where you can find all their latest deals, including on products like the Leafy Greens Hydro Garden Seed Kit, the 4Patriots Bountiful Green Plant Food, the Sauna Wrap Therapeutic Blanket, and the Solar Go Fridge with the solar panel. But right now, you can also get the deluxe 3-month survival food kits, which are back in stock. 688 total servings per kit, roughly 8 per day, and about 1,500 calories per day. Plus now with better recipes, including pancakes, mac and cheese, potato soup, pasta, and more. You can stash food away and be confident that when a disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4patriots.com/martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Scott, on to our second martini now. Also bad, but a little bit of crazy. First of all, and this is more related to our first martini than what we're actually going to be talking about in this section, but Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and you're an Illinois native, so you follow the news there closely. He was on State of the Union on CNN with Dana Bash yesterday. And first of all, when being asked about the protests on campus, he actually had the gall to say that Republicans are more eager for war in the Middle East than Democrats. Here's that clip.
When you think about the protests, it's Joe Biden that's standing for peace and a lasting peace at that. And it's the Republicans that, frankly, would stoke the flames of war in the Middle East.
The last Republican administration brought together the Abraham Accords, which put Israel in alliance economically and otherwise with a number of different Arab states. It's the weakness of Joe Biden, I would say, in Afghanistan and beyond that motivated Putin, is motivating Iran, Hamas, and et cetera. But in that same interview, the question naturally comes up. Chicago's famous for the 1968 convention, which dissolved into complete chaos and in some ways probably helped Richard Nixon become president that year. Well, Chicago's got the convention again. And J.B. Pritzker saying, no. It's going to be much more like 96 when nothing was happening, except celebrating the start of the second Bulls three-peat as opposed to 1968. He tried to do it with a straight face. Here's some of that.
Look, we believe in free speech, and we're going to allow people to protest and, say whatever it is they want to say. But the reality is we're also going to make sure that people have ingress and egress and that they're safe in our state.
Yeah. How do you think that's going to go, Scott? What we're seeing on campus, what we're seeing in cities all across the country in large numbers, do you think these people are just going to say, you know what, forget it, we're not going to go to Chicago this summer?
It's interesting to hear Governor Pritzker say that they believe in free speech. They're going to allow people to protest, say what they want to say. City of Chicago already is denying protest permits for organizations, and they are trying to corral the protesters in this small area like 5-6 blocks away from the United Center. There's no way that's going to hold up. I can't fathom that that's going to hold up in the face of what we've seen across the country. And we don't necessarily have the time for this to simmer down, right? We are actually ramping things up as we get to the summer, when theoretically students who might be in classes and not be occupying their quads would have even more free time because they don't have classes during the summer. So they're already trying to take steps to sort of limit the amount of protest and limit the protesters around the United Center at the DNC. And I've talked to friends in Chicago who are not frightened necessarily, but sort of resigned to the fact that this will devolve in a chaotic way for the city of Chicago and Chicago police. And, you take a look around the country, college campuses, these roads being blocked, which just happened in Chicago last week. Oh, he bragged about this on CNN. This was funny. J.B. Pritzker said protesters were out and about across the country, blocking the Golden Gate Bridge, blocking the roadway to O'Hare Airport in Chicago, where people are getting out of their cars to try to walk to make planes. J.B. Pritzker says protesters were out and about across the country. It was in Chicago where they ended that protest the soonest. This is like the SNL debate sketch in which Phil Hartman as Bill Clinton is bragging about the fact that Arkansas has now leapfrogged Mississippi to be 49th in literacy and 48th in the prevention of rickets. How about not having this happen at all? Yes, certainly people were prevented from getting to one of the busiest airports in the country, but we took care of it very quickly. Quickly for the people who are waiting for flights, quickly for the emergency responders who can't get to where they're supposed to be. That is no solace whatsoever. If Chicago doesn't, if Illinois doesn't, if Democrats, frankly, don't begin to step in, don't begin to make an example out of some of these protesters or protest movements, or don't begin to do something, I don't see a way that the DNC doesn't devolve into something really bad, really dangerous, because you continue to allow the protesters to set the terms of their protests and decide exactly the manner and time at which they're going to do these things, and you don't have much you can do about it because you've put no preventative measures in place, and you've essentially shown there are no consequences for doing any of it.
No, that's exactly right. And as you have documented many times for us, Chicago's pretty chaotic on a daily basis. So now you funnel in tens or possibly even hundreds of thousands of protesters in the middle of that. I mean, the media will probably do their best to ignore it and not spend a lot of time talking about it. But the idea that what's already an unstable situation is going to be able to handle that competently is not credible, is what I would say.
Front page story Sunday in the Chicago Tribune was about Mayor Brandon Johnson's plans to address the violence in the city and how it's not working a year into it, and how people are very skeptical because he's a far-left guy with far-left ideas about how to tackle crime. Monday, today, front page story Chicago Tribune, another Chicago police officer killed over the weekend in a carjacking in the Gage Park neighborhood. Very tough, very brutal 1-2 tag team punch of front page headlines Sunday, Monday in the Tribune about safety in the city of Chicago. And again, spin that forward to the DNC.
Yeah, whether it's Rahm Emanuel or Lori Lightfoot or Brandon Johnson or J.B. Pritzker, they're always promising that lower crime and law and order are going to prevail in Chicago. But given their penchant for pandering to the people responsible for the criminal activity, it never quite seems to happen. Well, Governor Pritzker says they're confident that things are going to run smoothly during the convention. I've got a feeling they might be drinking a little bit as those days unfold. But if they do, they should start with Z-Biotics before having any of those drinks. Z-Biotics is the pre-alcohol probiotic drink and is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic, invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut, and it's that byproduct, not dehydration or anything else, that's to blame for your rough next day. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best in the morning. A colleague of mine knew very, very well how much he could handle and feel pretty good the next day. But as he started to get older, he started to feel worse in the morning. So when we had this opportunity with Z-Biotics, he tried it, had the same amount he usually does, and felt a lot better the next morning. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Scott, let's stay with the presidential campaign here in our final martini. And this one's not about Trump. It's not about Biden, although they might factor into the conversation. But it's really about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in a couple different ways. First of all, there was an NPR poll out over the weekend showing that RFK Jr. polling 14% nationwide. And when factored in, Biden has a 5-point lead over Trump. But the national poll also shows Biden with a 3-point lead over Trump. And that's kind of in contrast to most other polls, which show Trump leading big time on the issues, but very narrowly on the head-to-head. Obviously, he brings his own baggage in as well. But the big news here for RFK Jr. is that he's on the ballot in Michigan, which the Biden administration is worried about because of the large Muslim population in the Dearborn area and other places in southeast Michigan. And they're worried that could cost them the election because of material and military support for Israel. So while they are providing that support, as we saw last weekend with the Iranian missile attack, they're also demonizing Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli military strategy at every possible turn to try and pander to these voters. Enter RFK Jr., who has now officially secured a place on the ballot in the battleground state of Michigan. The AP reporting that this happened Thursday, elevating his potential to affect the November election. Just last week, we talked about the fact that some of RFK Jr.'s siblings and cousins publicly endorsing Joe Biden, which, makes the family dysfunction there kind of fun to watch in a way, but also kind of sad. But Scott, you live in Michigan. It's clear, I think, that Biden is worried about it as a result of potentially losing the Muslim vote. Not necessarily that they'll go to Trump, but that they might not vote at all, or potentially go to Kennedy, I guess. What are you hearing on the ground, and how big of a factor do you think he could be there?
To the polling very quickly, a number of polls had shown RFK hurting Biden in a multi-candidate race. We now have 2 polls in a row, so if they're outliers, we'll find out soon enough, showing the opposite, that RFK might hurt Trump more in a multi-person presidential race. I think it's very difficult to figure that out this far in advance, especially because we're still dealing with this question about who's going to vote. And this is something else to watch, too. I'm sure you guys have talked about this, but, generally when you move in the past, when you went from a registered voter screen to a likely voter screen, that helped out Republican candidates whose voters are more likely to get to the polls. It's seemingly more certain now, or more likely now, that it might work the opposite way, that when you move from a registered voter screen to a likely voter screen, that might help Joe Biden because of the suburban votes and the kind of votes he's picked up and Democrats have picked up in the past decade or so. Those people are now more likely to vote. So that's something to watch as well. With RFK, I think you need to look at how the campaigns are treating him, the level of threat that they feel from this candidate. And it's clear right now that it's the Biden campaign that feels more heat and more pressure for what RFK might do to the Biden candidacy. You saw it with the Kennedys last week. You see it in the way that they're challenging ballot access in a number of states across the country. This was in the print edition of the Detroit Free Press this weekend. It's a big full-page ad from the National Resource Defense Council. And it begins by saying, "Earth to RFK Jr." And it's this big thing saying, don't run, and you're a quack, and you're only going to help Trump. By the way, I do find when I'm trying to convince someone to do something, it helps to insult them immediately. Like, Earth to RFK Jr. But again, this is the way that Biden supporters, too, are sort of seeing the threat that RFK poses. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the end it is different on a state-by-state basis. We don't have a national presidential election. We have state elections that determine electoral votes. You know how this works. But in a state like Michigan, I think what we feel here very much is that RFK could harm Biden more than Trump because of the large Palestinian American population. What we saw in the primary in which you had people not voting for Biden or voting for, I forget what it was, none of the above or whatever that option was. I think there's a real chance that happens here. It might be different in other states. It might be, RFK might hurt Trump more in other states. It's really hard to say, I think, at this point, especially when voters don't know for sure whether or not he's going to be on the ballot in their particular state. It could influence the way they're telling pollsters they'll vote if they don't know someone's going to be there. I know they try to account for this, but I think people's, psyches work in different ways. But I think you look at the way that, again, the Biden campaign, Biden supporters are treating RFK. They clearly see him as a potential spoiler in this race. And certainly Trump is a candidate that we saw in 2016 who knows how to win or was capable of winning these races in which you only needed 45 or 46% of the vote in certain places to end up winning that state. So, yeah, I think this decision of RFK in Michigan, we know Michigan's going to be a key battleground state. There's a lot of attention on it. Him being on the ballot, no matter which way he influences, certainly could affect the winner of the election. That's how close I think it will be in Michigan.
I would point out that none of the above doesn't work often. In fact, the most successful case I can think of is Monty Brewster in the New York City mayor's race back in the 80s when the local media was incapable of endorsing either of the corrupt candidates. It's a Richard Pryor, John Candy movie from back in the day. Fantastic, underrated movie. But speaking of not voting, there's this also from an NBC News presidential election poll. Among people who actually voted in 2020 and 2022, Joe Biden is +9. If you didn't vote in either, it's Trump +22. So if you actually want to win, you might want to get him to vote. It's a small but kind of important part of the process. So
yes, your vote counts.
Yes. Scott, always great to have you, and we'll do it again on Wednesday. So I appreciate your time as always.
Sounds good, Greg. Thank you.
Scott Bertram is the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College, where he's also a lecturer in journalism, directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, is the host of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. He's also the host of the Political Beats podcast and Wasn't That Special, 50 Years of Saturday Night Live. Subscribe to that and catch it at wasn'tthatspecial.com. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow all of us on X. Scott is at Scott Bertram with 1 T in Scott, SCOTBERTRAM. Jim is at Jim Garrity, and I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Monday, and join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.